All right, guys, I have a belief, and I've always had this saying, of course, this is the former defensive back in me, that in the game of football, there are two areas on the team that get you beat faster than any other. One is quarterback, the other is the secondary. But also in our game that is now 100 years old, there are these basic tenets that the game is won up front. So if you're playing on the defensive side of the ball, I have to pose the question, what really wins today in today's NFL? Is it the pressure that you put on the quarterback, or is it the coverage on the back end?
Man, you hit those hard questions right up front. I remember vividly having a phone call with these two guys and saying, like, what do you guys think? We're going to dive into this, but before we do, what's your guess? And I think all of us were a little hesitant, but we've all watched football, just like everyone else, and we see the pass rush. That's always on the screen, as is the quarterback. And so it's hard not to think it's going to be pass rush.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we discovered in our data set 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago. And like, we came at it very humbly because, I think all of us sort of grew up thinking, we watched guys like, Michael Strahan, Reggie White, Lawrence Taylor, those guys, and they were glorified, right? And whether there was a bias for that or whether they were truly having that big of an impact on the game, it was not our intuition that pass rush was going to be, on par or even less valuable than coverage, but that seems to be what our data suggests.
But we also came at it too from a PFF standpoint. The first few years of PFF, our whole thing was, well, pressure is more important than sack totals. So you're not just judging Michael Strahan off of a 20-sack season, right? It's well, when a quarterback is under pressure, his passer rating drops 30 points. So get him under pressure, right?
So pressure is important.
Yeah, pressure is extremely important. You turn Tom Brady or Drew Brees into Blake Bortles or Brock Osweiler. Of course that is significant. So we spent many years at PFF saying pressure the quarterback because hurries and hits are right up there with sacks as far as value and importance. So that was the other angle where I think we said, okay, definitely pass rush because of these pressure numbers.
But can I say this? The game has changed. Let's admit that this game has evolved over the 100 years, right?
Remember, thank God.
Thank God, right? And I guess, to draw an analogy, remember the saying was always, from a defensive standpoint, what is the number one thing we have to do? Stop the run. I mean, I came up in that NFL where we had to stop the run. Well, teams are no longer even running the ball on first down. The majority of the time, the ball is thrown. There's a pass play on first down and on second down and on third down. So with that said, what's the pass rush looking like on these early downs? Because I think the numbers might show that defenses are still playing the run while offenses, they're playing an entirely different game on first down.
Yeah, I mean, so as you said, passing used to take up a minority of the first down plays, right? It was like something in 2006, it was 47%, and now it's about 52%, and that was even like mid-season of 2018 was like 54%. And to your point, first down and second down pass plays, their pressure rates are 10 percentage points lower than third down, right? So when we look at, when we think about passing plays historically in the NFL, it was give the defense 2 body blows on first and second down, to get to third and 4, get to third and 6 even, and throw the football.
Then throw it.
And the defense
That's why
is
you pay the quarterback all that money.
and the defense is teeing off on you. But now it's more like, well, okay, but if the defense is going to be 33% less effective at rushing me during first and second down, why don't I just throw there, right? So our idea of a passing play is even probably a little jaded by the fact that the league is so old as it is, but has evolved to the point where it's far different now than it was.
And you've got the quick passing game, right? So not only are you passing, but now you're throwing the ball in 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds or less. And guys are so much more accurate. They're able to generate more open throws because of the different rule changes and how the interaction between wide receiver and cornerback has changed over the years. So now you've got guys just dicing up defenses on the quick passing game.
George, that speaks to, if I could draw an analogy here, to what we saw in the AFC Championship game. In that final drive where Tom Brady had the ball, I said to myself, there's no way they're going to get to Tom Brady. So if the Chiefs are going to win, they're going to have to win with coverage because I don't see the pressure getting home. Tom gets rid of it so quickly, he's not going to give you a chance. Yep. to hit the home run by getting a sack. And what happens? He throws the interception, but the defensive end, D Ford, is offsides and negates the interception. And the coverage doesn't show up, neither did the sacks. And so guess what? The Chiefs lose the ball game.
But even, sorry, real quick, in the divisional round too, they had the whole Joey Bosa's mic'd up.
Right.
Right? And he is whooping Trent Brown, who just made a ton of money, in 2 seconds, but the ball's out.
The ball's out.
And there was Joey looking at Tom. He's like, man, you're too quick. I mean, so the Chargers up front were actually winning battles, but the ball was out quick enough, and they actually caught it on their mic'd up segment and everything but then the Chargers get put into this coverage situation where you have to tackle and keep the ball in front of you, and all the pressure's on the secondary because there's no pressure on the quarterback.
Well, you mentioned how we look at numbers of quarterbacks under pressure.
Right.
And those are impressive. But you know what's more impressive? When you throw the ball in the tight coverage, right? Because tight coverage basically halves your expectation of yardage gained on a play relative to a step or more of separation. And that reverses the lens through which we look. The Chiefs, your Chiefs, were one of, if not the best pass rush, as were the Chargers in the NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, they generated the 5th most quick pressure in the NFL last season, and it didn't matter.
Well, coverage puts the ball back in the defense's court, right? So and we wrote about this in the article, most of what happens to a defense is how good the offenses are that it faces, right? And you talked about, Joey Bosa felt, powerless in that game. The only way that you put the power back in the defense's hands is by covering and forcing the quarterback to hang on to it for a quarter second more. Otherwise, the offense just can dictate how fast it throws, how much pressure it wants to take the risk in taking. And so, it is a symbiotic relationship. Coverage affects pressure, pressure affects coverage. But I think what puts the argument in coverage's side is that coverage affects pass rush, which then affects coverage again, right? So it's 2 parts of that link. And I think that's really why, again, it gives the defense an offensive feel when you can cover.
If you were to ask most quarterbacks, at least the really highly efficient ones, the Tom Brady's, the Aaron Rodgers, the Drew Brees, the Ben Roethlisberger, if you said, look, what would you prefer not to face?
Yeah.
They would say, if you rush 3 and drop 8, I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
They would probably say, if you pressured me, showed single high man-to-man coverage on the outside, it predetermines where I'm going to go with the ball because I got one-on-one. So they almost would prefer, the really highly efficient quarterbacks would almost prefer for you to pressure them and give you less coverage.
Well, that's why numbers against the blitz are better than against no blitz. And that's why when you look at the top quarterbacks against the blitz, it's no surprise. It's Brady, it's Brees, and it's Rodgers.
There you go.
And that, I think, is another thing as well, is your goal is to win the Super Bowl. To get to the Super Bowl, you always have to go through the best. So when you're playing run-of-the-mill quarterback, average or below.
Blitzing works.
Whatever. But when you have to face a quarterback that is at the top of his craft, he's going to make that edge even greater.
And you're not, coverage doesn't, and we talked about this in the article too, coverage does not guarantee you success against these quarterbacks. What it does is it guarantees you a better opportunity to take advantage of their few and far between mistakes, right? So if you aren't anywhere close to a receiver when Tom Brady throws a catchable, inaccurate pass, then you're not there to break it up. If he throws an uncatchable pass, you're not there to intercept it. The difficult part, and that's why there's so many visceral reactions to this, we're not saying that if you get good coverage, you're guaranteed to be good. What we're saying is that with lacking great coverage, we can be almost certain your defense is going to be
bad.
So I've challenged you guys in the past, right, to be like, all right, let's not just declare a statement and just go out there and be really cocky about it or whatever, add some nuance to it. And I thought you did a really good job in the article breaking down the nuance. And
Middle name is Nuance. I don't know if you do that.
George Nuance, Chahrouri. So, we went at it from, like you said, we didn't have an end game. We weren't trying to get to an end game. We're just kind of laying out the facts. And I think some of the facts that are important, just when you look at it in a macro view, right? A play that has good coverage, so to speak, a pass breakup, is 100% incomplete.
Yep.
A breakup, right? A play that has pressure, even though the passer rating drops 30 points, it's still 60, right? Mm-hmm. There's still touchdowns on that play. At a macro view, the best teams pressure the quarterback 35% of the time, right? So that's 65% of snaps that they need to cover without the pass rush
Without the
getting
pass
home. And it's
rush.
important to remember, when we talk pass rush or pressure, we're not talking about the act of blitzing. We're talking about actually physically pressuring,
Winning.
moving the quarterback, getting in his face, hitting him, and all that stuff. So that's how I've wrapped my head around this, is because every time when you guys brought this up, I was like, wait a second, what about Brady in the Super Bowl when the Giants were pressuring him 50% of the time? And there are those one-off examples
Yeah.
where maybe pass rush did win a game, but you're talking about every game in the NFL, not like the game I remember, right? And I think that's another big difference too, is to just think from a very macro view.
And to that point, think about what happens in certain levels of play at each position. So like you just brought up, okay, well, what happens when you get pressure? Well, it's good things happen. Let's flip the script here. What happens when you don't do a great job of pressuring? And you brought this up the other day. It was like, if you do a really bad job rushing the quarterback, well, it's not great, but it doesn't end the play.
No, it doesn't.
In today's NFL, if you do a bad job playing coverage,
Oh, it's over.
see you later.
That's right. So the downside from not getting pressure can still be minimized with good coverage. But the downside of bad coverage almost always equates to an explosive play for the offense. And as Dick LeBeau used to tell us, if you make a mistake in the secondary, usually the official is standing in the end zone holding up both arms. And you don't see that happening if the defensive lineman misses on a sack. Doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a total breakdown defensively. But if you mess up on the back end, it usually equates to a touchdown for the opposing offense.
So in terms of like how to make this actionable, like, so if you're looking at, because again, like if you're the Giants in 2007 or 2011, you have the team you have, right? So the Chiefs last year too. I think the fact that they made the AFC title game despite not having good players in the secondary was because they got good coverage. They had better defense than they would have had they had no one rushing the passer. But if you have your own free will and you have resources, how should you, in a time like now in the offseason, invest them? Like, we know that pass rushers, we're more capable of saying this pass rusher is going to be good year to year than we are saying this corner is going to be good year to year. So how do you respond to that sort of uncertainty embedded in this result?
So go ahead. I was going to say, that's the biggest point, is how do you
I was just going to point to you.
Draft more corners.
You always bring this up. And it's hard for people to wrap their head around the difference between team success and player success. And you brought this up the other day at the Saquon Barkley debate. You don't get wins for all pro nominations. That does not happen. And so it's important. Stability is nice. And when you say, you just brought that up, right? So how well does a player's performance in 1 year tell you about how he's going to perform the next year? And for pass rushers, that's very good. And for corners, it's not as good. But there's two components here. You also need to look at how valuable these components are. How well does playing well in pass rush and playing well in coverage impact winning? That's really, you can't have one or the other. You've got to have both. And coverage is more valuable. If you go read the article, we'll dig into the numbers. And so with that being said, you look at those two things and you go, well, the value isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
So some way I've got to bring in coverage. And so you've got to take shots even if you know the success rate is low, because the value is high.
Yeah, and it has to, as Solomon said, it's got to be sort of this diverse, collection of assets, right? So we look at the Eagles in 2017. They signed Rodney McLeod the year before. They went ahead, they traded for Ronald Darby in the preseason. They signed Patrick Robinson to a prove-it deal. They drafted Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas. Jones got hurt, Darby got hurt, but during the course of that season, they made a bet that of these 5 corners, at any given time, 3 were going to be passable, right? And by sheer numbers, if you have 6 quality players, we don't know necessarily, it's like the birthday problem. We don't know necessarily which one of these corners is going to be good, but we know that if we have 6 of them, 3 of them are going to be passable at any given time.
And you need 3 starters.
I'm so glad you just alienated 90% of our birthday problem.
So the Eagles, I think,
the birthday problem.
the Eagles, I think, are my prime example, because back, a few years ago at PFF, we do roster rankings, and we did it not so much focused on positional value, and we just go, okay, do they have a good quarterback or running back, and you put it all together. And the Eagles in, say, 2016 had one of the best rosters in the NFL. Great offensive line, great defensive line, but they were lacking at receiver and at cornerback. Now, flip the script to 2017, all of a sudden Nelson Aguilar gets better, and Alshon Jeffrey's in the mix, and Wentz, takes a step forward, and then the whole cornerback situation, and that becomes a Super Bowl team. They had the best defensive line in the NFL in 2016 and 17. Both years, completely different results. The difference for them was coverage. Now, the Eagles fans that come at us, say, well, Jim Schwartz he already said he builds his team based around the pass rush, which is fine. I mean, that's his belief. I think that's how the Chiefs are trying to do it behind Steve Spagnuolo, but we're trying to highlight the fact that the pass rush was essentially the same in 16 and 17. The difference was the back end.
You can be successful. We're not saying that you can't be successful with a strong pass rush. What we're saying is that coverage does a better job of helping you win good coverage.
It holds greater value when it comes to attributing to victories. And I put it like this. I just believe that if you have greater coverage on the back end, Tony Dungy used to talk about the fact that great defenses have a way of intercepting all tips and overthrows. Well, think about the Super Bowl against the Falcons, where the ball's tipped up in the air, it's seemingly up there forever, and Julian Edelman comes down with it. Like, for every defensive coach who lives by that premise that the defense should intercept all tips and overthrows, there's only one offensive player in a sea of defensive players, and he comes down with that ball. I think that's more of an anomaly, particularly when you talk about what's actionable. What's actionable is you've got to teach defensive backs that we do intercept all tips and overthrows. You have to have multiple coverage players. You need a shutdown corner. You need a nickel corner.
Yep.
Okay, you need a smart ball hawking safety. Derwin James is the guy that I would say is at the tip of the spear for what kind of safety you want in today's NFL. You get a collection of those kind of players. They don't necessarily have to be as talented individually, as long as we can get them thinking on the same page, understanding what their specific roles are.
Yep.
And if you're dropping 8 and only rushing 3, particularly against a non-mobile quarterback, what is he going to do? He can't hold it all day. Where is he going to throw it? These windows are tighter, and one ball that's tipped, one ball that's overthrown, that comes down in the hands of the defense, that's playing winning football.
Well, and you made a great point. There's ways of salvaging value out of defensive backs as assets in ways that you can't out of defensive linemen. If a pass rusher can't get pressure, there's not a whole lot more you can do with him. But if a guy like Patrick Robinson struggles as a first-round pick on the outside and you put him in the nickel, there's a potential for value there.
Exactly what the Eagles did really well.
If a safety like Malcolm Jenkins is a pretty good safety, but now that he's getting a little older, he plays more of a linebacker for him.
Yeah.
So whereas the Patriots do a great job of this. Like Patrick Chung only covers tight ends. Duron Harmon's a deep safety. Devin McCourty was a corner. Now he's a great all-around safety.
Very role-driven.
And they're very Logan Ryan, in the Super Bowl basically covered Julio Jones the entire time with help because they trusted their other corners.
When you think about the Patriots secondary, I mean, are there any really blue chip guys? They went out and they signed one corner, right? And people in Buffalo couldn't believe it. They're like, you gave him all of that money?
But having that one corner, there's actually multiple times in Patriots history.
Yeah.
So they had Aqib Talib became that guy for them back in
They've
2012
had the one,
and
right?
13, right? And then it became Darrelle Revis, and then kind of became Malcolm Butler, and then it became Stephon Gilmore. When Aqib Talib got hurt back in the day, it completely screwed up their entire game plan because he couldn't take the top guy, and then there's the trickle-down effect in their secondary where we always say, look, you can't scheme away from the good corner. I mean, you could throw away from him, but you can't scheme away from him. You could throw away from him, and then if you're good elsewhere, you can the defense wins, right? But you can scheme against multiple good pass rushers with the quick passing.
And that's a really important point as to, coverage isn't very stable. It's up and down year to year. But that's because of how hard it is to truly be good at coverage. We just spent all this time mentioning the different components you need. You brought up all those positions, and you didn't even mention linebacker.
That's right.
We got
who's also part of the coverage scheme.
And important. I mean, look at what the Seahawks have done. Look at what the Falcons lost out on last year when Deion Jones went out. I mean, it destroyed things. You've got running backs and tight ends that are becoming great receivers. Yeah. And so one of the reasons that coverage is so hard to sustain, but is still valuable, is that if you have one weak coverage guy, the offense is going to just dice you up.
Oh yeah,
right. And
they'll find you.
And it's almost the reverse with pass rush, right? Like we have so many teams that have one good pass rusher, and then you've got another guy that picks up a bunch of sacks because you're drawing all this attention. And so I think one of the reasons it's so unstable is there is a lack of understanding in that realm. There's I had 3 good cornerbacks. I don't need any more. I can't possibly draft one now because someone is going to potentially see their job going away.
The teams that volume draft.
So here, can I ask this question? Because we talk about actionable items based on this new information and the way that the game has evolved. I think coaches, if you said, hey, do you need more than just one good corner? Most of them would tell you, yeah. But Bill Belichick says, no, just give me the one. If you give me the one real shutdown corner, I can scheme up all the other areas. And if you look at their team at the end of just about each and every year, well, they may start off struggling. He gets them all to play together, and they're really good at what? Keeping the score down. Year after year, they're one of the best defenses when it comes to points allowed. Yep. They may not get the most turnovers, but they don't give you a lot of points.
And they really don't pressure the quarterback a whole lot. And that's what I like what you guys did, right? To come to this conclusion, right? You showed me the complex mathematical way that you did it, but it was essentially, let's look historically, teams that didn't rush the passer well, but covered well. Yeah. Teams that did rush the passer well, but didn't cover well. And of course, the teams that did both. Of course you want both.
You want both.
Yeah. It's the 2013 Seahawks. I mean, it's the best teams of all time. But it comes down to, if you had to choose cover well or rush well, and you just look at the teams that did that historically, right? The win totals just skew toward the teams that covered well. Yeah. And the Patriots' last 3 Super Bowl teams, just using PFF pass rush grade, they're all top 3 coverage teams, and they're in the 20s as far as pass rush grade goes. So that's a small example, but it's an example of how teams have
Can I ask a question real quick? Last year, the start of the 2018 season, we know that we have the quick passing game, which I think negates pass rush. But rule changes clearly took away the aggression that the pass rush normally brought to the game. Did we see a spike in scoring as a result?
Yeah. And we saw the penalties wane as the season progressed, and we saw scoring go down. I mean, it's absolutely part of, and that's what makes like sort of looking forward at this. Like, what are the things to explore next in this realm? One of them, and you brought it up, is scheme, right? So we look at the Colts last year, very much like you talked about the Patriots, gave up a pretty high success rate in terms of, teams are getting closer to scoring play for play, but didn't give up a ton of expected points. They're not giving up big plays. And so like what aspect of scheme contributes to that? Because we know the Colts, Pierre Desir played okay, but like not a hugely talented defensive backfield. The same thing with the Patriots. So like I think the next thing sort of, these are broad brush, league-wide results, but like where do we go next? Do we break it down to, okay, here are cover 3 teams, here are cover 2 teams, here are sort of these like different sorts of schemes, and are there schemes where pass rush is more important? Or are there schemes where the corner is really the linchpin of the coverage versus these other ones where safety is? I'm thinking of Seattle and Los Angeles Chargers in those realms. So there's certainly a lot more work to be done and a lot more fun, exciting ways to explore this problem, but broad brush coverage, extremely important.
You described teams that were, the Indianapolis Colts played as much cover 2, more conservative zone than any team in the league. The Patriots play more man coverage than any team in the league. So you're talking about 2 different teams that essentially had that bend but don't break defense, for lack of a better term, as far as what the results looked like, but they did it from different ways. So I definitely think, and that's where I think a lot of this stemmed from the Frank Clark discussion with the Kansas City Chiefs, right? This massive investment to kind of replace their pass rush that they got last year from Dee Ford, from Justin Houston, have a complement to Chris Jones up front, and the idea that maybe that scheme, because they have Steve Spagnuolo, maybe they're looking at it, look, we're not playing as much man coverage as we did under Bob Sutton. I'm going to scheme it up every week. We're going to mix it up with zone and man. I want my pass rusher. I'll scheme it up on the back end. So it's just teams are approaching things in different ways. And again, we're looking at it from this macro view of, again, if you had to choose one, you want to be able to.
George, are we going to continue to track this through the 2019 season to see if this hypothesis bears out?
I mean, I'll be preaching it every day, and it's something that is a part of all the predictive work that we do, right?
That's
the
right.
fact that something is better at predicting who's going to win a game bears out, and that's why teams that can cover the pass and pass the ball with efficiency are the ones that are eventually going to rise to the top as they did last year. But it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the point that we should make here is, you go read the article, go ask questions, but go, if you're not satisfied, and we aren't, go do more research, because, we're just kind of scratching the surface as far as the things that we can learn. It doesn't mean they're not important. Because you got to start somewhere, and you got to leverage those insights. But by no,
We know what's
means
not
is it
important.
finished.
That's stopping the run. We got that.
I
thing.
want to be. I
We're not
want to be
discussing
more
that.
predictive, and I want to predict that if you rush 3 and drop 8, you will cause headaches for the truly great quarterbacks in this league. They do not want to throw into a crowded secondary. And by dropping 8 and only rushing 3, all you're doing is saying, we're going to contain you, we're going to keep you in the pocket, and I dare you to throw the ball down the field. Most of them will not do it.
The only problem there is that the best quarterbacks are usually more patient there.
That's
And
right.
that's one of those, like when you rush 3 against Brady in the red zone,
Yeah.
he's got the good feel for, okay, I know there's holes in the pocket, I'm going to maneuver, I'm going to find the open guy. When you rush 3 against Matthew Stafford in the red zone, he's like throwing on time.
He's still throwing.
You don't want
That's
to throw
right.
on time.
You wanna
against,
wait.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is where I'd almost use that 3-man rush against lesser quarterbacks who don't have that, innate feel. But it is a great, discussion on the different ways to do things.
We shall see. I want to thank you, gentlemen. I pride myself into always being able to take in new knowledge. And for me, this has been very new because I was always built or taught the premise that this game is won and lost from the men up front. But now we know it's won from the guys on the back end of the defense.